Thank you for joining this event. My name is Ilaria Geddes. I am a research fellow at the University of Cyprus. I work on the KAEBUP project with Nadia Karalambos, who is the project coordinator and will be presenting some of our research today, along with Vitor Oliveira. What I will do is I will give just a very, very brief introduction to the project and how this event specifically fits within the project. I will change my screen to the presentation. So, KAEBUP stands for Knowledge Alliance for Evidence-Based Urban Practices. It's a project funded by the Erasmus Plus within the Knowledge Alliances program. And it's really aimed at bringing together academia and practice. Like all other Erasmus projects, it has a strong pedagogic focus. But within the Knowledge Alliances, it aims at bringing together practice industry into academia so that students are able to be in touch, be involved with practice, and develop entrepreneurial skills as well as skills within the field of the project. We have 8 partners in the project, and when we set up the consortium, we intentionally set it up so that we would have a collaboration between academia and practice within each participating nation. So in Cyprus, here where we are coordinating the project, we have the University of Cyprus and ALA Planning Partnership, which is a planning consultancy. In Portugal, we have the University of Porto and an architectural studio, Andre Dias Araújo Architecture and Design. In Italy, we have the University of Parma and another architectural studio, Schiattarella Associates. But we also have an NGO, which is of Italy, the regional network of the International Seminar on Urban Form. Additionally to this makeup of partners, we have an NGO in Croatia called Social Fringe, Interesting Untold Stories, which works more specifically on urban sociology and user perspective in urban planning and urban design. Within the project, we have 3 themes. We actually call them pathways towards evidence-based practice. The first one is about pedagogy. It's innovative learning, and we aim at innovating learning and teaching through knowledge exchange and skills development, working on real-life urban projects, specifically using urban projects in our teaching activities, which come from the partner organizations. This event today definitely falls within this pedagogic theme. Our second theme is entrepreneurship, and we do research understanding urban models, looking at practices which actually implement research to develop their design and planning, and also co-creating urban knowledge. And this is through the exchange among students, teaching, research, academic staff, and company staff, both in our learning activities, in our research activities, but also through more sort of standardized involvement with practice, for example, through internships. That's all I want to say about the project itself. What I will add is that for every key piece of research that we do in the project, additionally to the main output, which in this case is a full report, which you can find on the website and will be presented by Vitor and Nadia today, We also produce a one-page research summary, which is more accessible, just to provide summary information about the research that was done, the methods, the findings, and the recommendations. We also produce, where relevant, a set of definition cards related to the specific research. In this case, we have 4 definition cards relating to these report, to this research component. And they are urban morphology, blended learning, constructive alignment, and communities of practice. We have many social media platforms, but we also have a YouTube channel. So from these will be shared through the YouTube channel. That is all from me. I will stop sharing, and I will give the floor to Vitor and Nadia with a brief introduction. Vitor is through the University of Porto, one of the partners in the KAEBUP project, and he is professor of urban morphology and urban planning, as well as the president of the International Seminar on Urban Form. Nadia is the project coordinator for KAEBUP and associate professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Cyprus. Vitor and Nadia.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us for this event. So I'll just share my screen. And let me see if I change the presenter's view. Can you see the presenter's view, or is it okay? Can you see my screen? Okay. Okay, perfect.
I can still see the presenter's view.
How do I change that?
Do you have a 2-screen setup?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult. I'm never able to do it. One way is to just unplug the second screen if you don't need your presenter view. If you do,
best way to do it. Okay.
So,
I can just start then. Okay, so I'll skip the presentation that Ilaria went through about the project. And I'll start with the presentation of this literature review. I will do the first part, which will focus on the pedagogic model and how it developed. And then Vitor will continue with the second part, focusing on the validation framework for this pedagogic model and KAEBUP's learning and training activities in relation to this pedagogic model. So this model, we can see schematically here how it was developed. It was based on a literature review, which in a way, let me just move on, reviewed existing pedagogic models in higher education, what kind of pedagogic models we have, then specifically focusing more on pedagogic models in e-learning, and doing a quick review on urban morphology education in the past years, and then reviewing existing blended learning and OER, open educational resources in urban studies. So this was what the report was about, and this was done through desktop research, but also through interviews of all KAEBUP's partners as regards these different approaches. So there are a number of approaches, pedagogical approaches, which relate usually to different aims that teachers and educators have for the individuals and the groups which are involved in learning. We have identified 3 such approaches, general approaches, which are named didactic, authentic, and reflexive transformative. The didactic is mostly related very briefly with instructional outlines, the consumption of knowledge and its recitation. authentic pedagogy focusing more on real life experiences and how the content of teaching is relevant to the learners in terms of real life, and that relates a bit to KAEBUP objectives. And then reflexive and transformative pedagogy, as it is called, which is usually based on problem solving and co-designing teaching, so that learners are also engaged in producing knowledge and, most importantly, in understanding the meaning of the content and how it makes a difference to them by reflecting on their own learning. But even these general models, let's say, are selected from tutors, there needs to be an alignment between the different components in implementing one of these approaches, or both or more, and the desired learning outcomes, how one can implement the approach and how one can achieve the desired learning outcomes. And these usually are based on learning theories, which should be reviewed in parallel to enable the mapping of any of these selected approaches to learning activities. And we have identified 3 of these learning theories, which we found are very interesting, and some of them relevant to KAEBUP's objectives. The first one, which is named as associationist or empiricist, let's say, approach, emphasizes routines of organized activity, clear goals, feedback, and individualized pathways and routines. The second one, which is called cognitive perspective or cognitive view, emphasizes more interactive environments and learning activities which encourage more experimentation, and there is support for reflection. And the third one, which is called situative perspective or view, emphasizes even more participation in social practices of inquiry and learning, support for the development of learners' identities, and facilitation of learning relationships. So these are 3 of the learning theories that we have identified and tried to see how it relates to KAEBUP's objectives and activities. In relation to these pedagogical approaches or and learning theories, there have been a number of tools developed which aim to classify assessment questions in relation on how to achieve the learning outcomes supported by the different approaches and theories. And there have been taxonomies as well. One very well-known one is Bloom's taxonomy. We have identified one which we think relates to the way KAEBUP is approached, which is called, most of you probably know it, constructive alignment, which was proposed by Biggs and Tang. And very, very briefly, this concept is based on a student-centered model of teaching. And in practice, it translates into outcomes-based teaching and learning, where the students clearly understand the learning outcomes that they are meant to achieve. In other ways, effective learning aims at changing the participants' perspective of the world. Then we moved on to look for more specific pedagogic models which relate to e-learning. And we identified 3, as you can see on this diagram, relating mostly in the instructional one, relating mostly to a series of direct, let's say, instructions, presentation, practice, assessment, evaluation, and feedback. The constructivist one, which in a way supports that learning takes place when students are actively engaged in making meaning and understanding what the meaning of the assignments are. And communities of practice, which see learning mostly as social participation through the understanding of how communities of practice are formed and developed. And we went through a series of questions on how one chooses or approaches, let's say, a pedagogical model and related to e-learning. And there are a number of questions such as whether it relates to real practice, real world practice, active discussion, and so on. The next part of the report focused more on urban morphology education, and identified some courses and some approaches to the teaching of urban morphology education. Just some of the approaches that we have identified. Some of the pedagogical models discussed have informed pedagogical approaches to urban morphology education. I mean, it is important to note that there has been an increasing acknowledgement of the importance of urban form to the many dimensions of everyday life and to the educational function that it has, since through the detailed study of urban form, we learn both what not to do, but also how to do things better. And it also provides an appreciation and training for integrating closely related fields of practical application, such as planning, urban design, and architecture, which is one of KAEBUP's objectives. And there have been these interesting examples in the past and supposedly continuing, which relate urban morphology to design practice and which try to identify the appropriate content of morphological teaching. And some of these courses have been taught, like the one by Marco and Vito, in different universities in different countries. There have also been research projects that we have identified. I'm just presenting one here where most of us were involved in, and some of you might be quite familiar, which is the Emerging Perspectives on Urban Morphology project, EPUM, where in this case, the project tried to identify the most, the dominant, let's say, schools of thought in urban morphology. We identified through the project and through an extensive literature review for such, let's say, schools of thought in urban morphology, which have their own theories, concepts, and methods to address the physical form of city and to impact on socioeconomic, environmental aspects of life. The project ended up to propose an open learning curriculum in urban morphology and identified a gap in collaborative learning activities, which many times can transcend local context and can bridge different institutions with different approaches and different kind of learners. So what the project proposed is what was called CLAs, collaborative learning activities, which take place on a dedicated platform developed by the project and bring together schools of thought, institutions, and learners through what is called a blended learning approach. So it included both hands-on physical workshops and online synchronous, but also asynchronous activities, as well as the development of open educational resources, OERs. Through the literature, we realized that, okay, there is not much in literature on blended learning specifically in urban studies or OER specifically related to urban studies. But there are some very interesting examples like the MIT Open Courseware, an open course proposed by Gil on learning GIS, and so on. And this is an example of the YouTube channel that EPUM developed, which includes open educational resources available to interested people. So we found that blended learning is indeed a plus. It's indeed quite useful in bringing together these different approaches, pedagogical approaches, but also content-wise, which can bring together learners, but also learning styles, academic programs, subject matters, and different institutional frameworks, synchronously, but also asynchronously, without, let's say, disrupting the schedules or the curriculum of existing institutions. And I just cited some on the right concepts related to blended learning as proposed by Driscoll. He says that there are different definitions which in a way highlight the potential of blended learning to enhance the learning experience. So I'll just wrap up here so that Vito can take over. So all these reviews of the pedagogical models in an e-learning environment the situation in the teaching of urban morphology informed, and blended learning techniques inform the proposed pedagogic model of KAEBUP, which is summarized in this diagram and in the sentences below. So KAEBUP, what it was cited in collaboration with the partners, is that KAEBUP in a way adopts a reflexive and transformative pedagogical approach, which is aligned with the main objective of the project to co-produce knowledge and to use reflexive practice as part of learning and of evaluation. If I give an example, is the internship diaries that students developed during their internships in the practices that participate in KAEBUP. And also authentic pedagogy, because that relates again to our objective to use real-life case studies which have been completed by the partners, the enterprises that participate in the project. And the selection of real-life case studies is also important in this pedagogical model, and it was intentional from the beginning and an integral part of the project since its inception, in order to make the learning process relevant to students in terms of real-life demands that will be posed on them in their future professional career. So the pedagogic model is characterized by a focus on the development of real-life practice. It follows a situative approach to learning, establishing and enabling a community of practice of students, researchers, educators, and professionals who share this common interest of the built environment, who carry out joint activities, who share open resources, experiences, methods, tools, and approaches. Blended learning, again in this project, like in EPUM, is particularly important for the activities of the project and for the implementation of the project, because it can support and facilitate this community of inquiry, which is constituted above and beyond barriers, institutional, geographical, physical. And at the same time, it allows multiple levels and types of instruction to be adopted that Victor will also refer to. In that sense, it provides the conditions for the implementation of free, open dialogue, critical debate, negotiation, and so on, through the development of a platform, which we call the Research to Practice platform. We apply constructive alignment in the project. So we set learning outcomes for the different activities, focusing on the cognitive abilities that we think are important for the specific field, but also supporting the development of transversal skills through our collaboration with enterprises and entrepreneurs. So we provide an all-rounded approach to learning. The different components of the project's pedagogic approach, are detailed in what we call the validation framework, which Victor will talk about, the document on teaching and training method, and a toolkit, which we have developed, a toolkit for developing transversal skills. So I'll stop here and pass it over to Victor.
Thank you. So I think you can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. I will try to be faster than Nadia because I should be giving, well, I should be giving the word to Carl right now. So, but just to recover some of the main things that Nadia has told us in these last minutes, our pedagogic model is based on a situative approach to learning that establishes this thing that we call community of practice, involving different people, students, researchers, educators, professionals. And they are all gathered around this common interest on the built environment. And because of that, and because the built environment is kind of glue to bringing us for developing joint activity and for sharing resources. The recognition and the validation of learning outcomes is a core element of KAEBUP. It's a core element for all the activities that take place in the project and for all mobilities. The achievement of these learning outcomes is also something that is central for us, and that is assessed through a set of procedures that are based on clear and transparent criteria that's set out in this validation framework. As Nadia said, the validation framework is based on the pedagogic model, and in a way it expresses the main strategies that are contained in that model. We try to design a flexible system of validation to enable and to attract a variety of people to participate in our activities. So as you will see, the project is a process that is made of a high number of events, and different people are attracted to participate in one event or in many events throughout the life of the project. So we include 5 types of events, and I will show you in the next slides very briefly what these events are. One of these, and I bring it to illustrate this validation matrix, one of these is something that we have called international training workshops. We have done 3 of these, and this illustration that you see in this slide is for one of these 3 workshops that we had here in Porto. It's a 1-week event labeled or titled Urban Morphology and the Assessment of Physical Change. And in this table, you can see how the event is characterized, what are the learning outcomes that we expect, and what is the kind of evaluation that we propose. So we have done one of these matrices for each of the different events that take place along the project. And this is a shared work between all the participants. And as we have focused so much on the students and on the learning outcomes, this has to be clear for this community of practice that is involved in the project and in its different events. So as you remember, the main goal of the project is to bridge research and practice on the built environment. And for that, we have designed a high number of events in a process where sometimes it goes from research to practice, and other times it goes from practice to research. And that is what is illustrated in this slide. In the end, we want all these events to be collaborating for this goal of creating an educational and a training process that can offer participants the opportunity to engage in practice, in real life practice. And as such, we hope to learn how research can be the basis for innovative planning practices, but we also want to explore what academia is expecting from research on the different forms of action on the built environment. So Throughout the process, we have come many times to these 3 case studies. These are, as you can see, 3 very different types of action on the built environment. One is a more indirect action. It's a plan designed for a place in Cyprus. The other 2 are 2 architectural projects, one for a common residential building and another one for a special building, one in Porto, one in Saudi Arabia. These projects and plan were being developed or just concluded by 3 of the 4 partners in practice that we have in the project. And this is the process. Take this. This is the process that we have designed. These are the 5 main types of events that occur along the process. The first type is something kind of heterogeneous. It's the more heterogeneous type. It's called small-scale activities, and it can go from a one-day event like the one that we are having today to something more extended in time that can involve the participation of this community of practice for 1 month or 2 months. The second and third types of events are workshops that are promoted within these universities. So we go from research to practice, and these are the international training workshops that I mentioned some minutes ago. Both workshops are 1-week events. As you can imagine from these posters and titles, they are taught by essentially by people that teach architecture and urban design and planning courses. And then we have something that is rather different, these business model workshops. They are offered by the universities, by those 3 universities, but because they focus on something that we are not very familiar with, which is business models, we get the collaboration of 2 international experts in all these workshops, René and Laurent. And finally, the last events, and now we are going from practice to research. The last events, first, these professional development sessions. We go to a city and we get the collaboration of practitioners, of different practitioners acting on that city, and they come to us and talk us about their daily experiences. And finally, the students' internships. We are 3 universities, and we select students to go for 2 months for practicing in these partners that we have in the project. And the rule is that a student that is based in one university should go to a partner that is located in a different country. To conclude, in the end, what do we get? With this literature review on blended learning, with this pedagogic model, learning method, and validation framework, we try to give a contribution for this arch, for this bridge. For those who have been involved in linking the 2 worlds, you should share my opinion. I think that there are many difficulties involved in this process. So in the end, we will not have a miraculous solution for bridging research and practice, but I think that in December, we will have a robust contribution on this idea of building a process of relation between research and practice. And I will stop my sharing and my presentation, and now give the word to Carl. I don't know if Ilaria wants to, she wants.
Thank you, Vitor. And yes, we'll give a word to Carl Kropf, who's going to present urban morphology as a foundation and scaffold. Carl is the director and owner of Build-Form Resource Ltd, as well as a senior lecturer at Oxford Brookes University. Carl.
Thank you, Ilaria, and thank you, Vitor and Nadia, for inviting me. I will share my screen now. All right, is that showing up?
Yes.
Okay, let me put it on. Okay, what I wanted to do really is, I hope very quickly, just describe the Masters in Urban Design course as a instance of trying to create that connection between the research and teaching. So I'd like first to acknowledge that this is a very broadly based course and involves quite a number of people. So it's co-taught by these people here, and we also have practitioner guest lecturers coming. So we have full and part-time staff, some like me also engage in practice, and then some are coming in to share their knowledge in effect from their practice. That is the overall structure of the course, just to try and give you an idea. There are, it runs for the master's, it's a 1-year course or 2 years part-time. We have on a Tuesday, essentially the theory section, and on a Wednesday, the design studio. And then we go from, essentially these are set out in parallel. So as we're going through the theory, that's progressively being applied in the studio section. So there's a coordination and link between what's happening on the Tuesday and then on the Wednesday. The second semester or second year is essentially taking what we've done and building on it and extending it to an international context. We have quite a lot of international students, and we benefit from them by having them help to provide information about the context in different places. But that's a basic structure. But to break it down a bit, so the theory section is also broken down. So in the morning we have lectures. Some of those are recorded, and we have a question and answer session. And then there's a workshop in the afternoon where what was gone over in the morning is applied, both in terms of a understanding the method, but also starting to apply that. It's always a case of, well, we learn this method, so what do we do with it? How do we go from that perhaps descriptive method to something that can be applied to design in a more normative way? That's again extended in that in the Wednesday session by more specifically applying it to the studio project. Those projects are always live projects, so we have input from clients and often from design firms that are involved in it. So it's, as Nadia and Vitor were saying, it's very situated, and it's trying to give the the environment in which the students are likely to be working. As I say, then we go to the international theories. So we're extending those. So essentially, as I'll go on to say, the theory in the first semester is very much based on urban morphology, and it's built up over the course of the term and then applied together. And then there's the design studio, which is also international. So just to give you a quick idea, so you can see we use the idea of the different aspects or layers, morphological layers of different aspects of use, movement, urban tissue, and open space networks, also talking about control of those spaces, and building up those different layers to provide a basis, essentially that foundation that we're talking about. And just to break it down, say an example of one of the sessions. So we have the recorded lectures, question and answer, an initial exercise. So in this case, it's urban tissue. They do an initial exercise in map sequencing and then identification of urban tissue. The students are asked to undertake that analysis and then present it back to us for feedback. We go then to the international section. Essentially, we say, you've learned all those separate methods. Now we're going to put them together and apply them in different places. And so we provide examples and have the different people. So Prachi Ranpuria is from India, so she helps us out with the study of Ahmedabad. Roland Wong from Hong Kong talks about Hong Kong. So we then apply those. Now, in the case of the first session, the result is the accumulation of a workbook. So as they go through, they record what they've done and are asked to make observations, critical assessments of what they're doing and how they would best apply it. And we take that, we say to them, take that and use that as a tool as you go through when you apply it both to your design project and take it with you. You know, it's a record and should be built up. Then when it comes to the second session, we essentially do a field study and the students get together in groups and we'll put together essentially analysis of a site. In this case, this year we did it several sites in London, very different. And so the students put together those essentially as a professional report. And we have very good feedback from the practitioners who come to see. This is from the end of year show this year. Practitioners come see it, and essentially they see that the students are prepared to be able to do the kind of work that they would be asked to do as part of a major project. They extends into the research element, which is the MA dissertation, and we encourage the use of the morphological framework or the morphological concepts as a framework for research. So that's informing their research. And just to kind of summarize it, what we're trying to do is build a foundation of the knowledge and understanding through the use of morphological concepts. And so that gets built up, but it's also applied both in research and application. And that's essentially to articulate it, extend it, and that forms the scaffold. So those concepts provide the scaffold. And then as we absorb that, it becomes then integrated back into the foundation from which we can further extend in an ongoing cycle. And I would say that essentially also has an underpinning in morphology, which is essentially the typological process writ large. So thank you.
Today's presentation before we move on to the debate. So Fei Chen will be presenting Education through Collaboration, Teaching Urban Form in the Liverpool School of Architecture. Fei is a reader in Architecture and Urban Design at University of Liverpool. Fei?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I was going to share my screen now, and hope that's coming up. I think that's in the right presentation mode, right?
Yes, that's fine.
Right. Okay. So my talk would be about education through collaboration. I think it's really quite fits the pedagogical models that Nadia mentioned earlier, and also the concept of situated perspective. The concept of education through collaboration exactly is about bringing a community of people, relevant people together to in the learning environment, so including students and practitioners and clients and researchers and educators. That's exactly what we're trying to do in Liverpool School of Architecture. So I'm going to show two recent last year's studio projects to show how we did this in the school. Before I show the two projects, I want to very briefly mention the architecture program structure for people who are not familiar with the UK educational system. So basically, the accredited architecture program, so accredited by RBA, Royal Institution of Architects, and also ARB, it consists of 3 years of undergraduate study and then 2 years of master study. And in between, the students can take a year of practice. Of course, not every student pass through the undergraduate to master program, but if they pass them, they will get accreditation, and finally, when they pass the stage 3, they will get the qualified architect. So how this program structured is we have half of the credits allocated to lecture-based modules. One part of that is done about context, so we cover history and urban studies. And the other part of the lecture-based is on technology and environmental science. And then the half of the credits of the whole program is on studio. So we do. And because we have so many students from year 2, we have more than 250 students every year. So the studio is operated based on unit basis. So the units normally will have 3, 4, or 5 units, depends on student numbers. And the units would have the freedom to set up brief and the exact project. In terms of where we teach urban morphology, one is in year 2. In the urban studies module, we introduce the concept of urban morphology and all the basic theory of morphology. I led this module. I lead this module, and in MR4, so we may get very different cohort of students. In the module of urban design, we introduce the concept of urban morphology, but really tailor that to design practice. So how morphology could inform design practice. And also, because I lead the research group, Urban Form and Social Space in the school, which called UFSS, we operate a unit in master level. And we do, I'll show you a project that's led by UFSS later. So that's the group of academics from the Urban Form and Social Space Research Center in the School of Architecture. So currently we have 8 staff, also quite a few PhD students. We have many students graduated, and we welcome the students every year. So we co-teach in those modules I just mentioned, urban studies and urban design, and also studio. So now I'm going to show you two projects that one is on the BA level, how we, I don't know why this is a video, which is not playing for some reason. Okay, it's coming now. So at the BA level, last year we did a project in Highton, a small town outside Liverpool. The town is really facing the challenge of dead high street. So the council is really eager to regenerate the high street. So we formed this collaborative relationship with local council and architecture practice who are already doing design in this high street. So we bring students into this real scenario, real case scenario, to propose ideas to regenerate the high street. So the project was operates in two steps. One is a meanwhile test project, so students can propose ideas to test the need on the high street and how people react, the local community react to those new proposed function. And then stage two, next half of the year, they propose some like a real permanent building on the selected site on the high street. So that is the process we went through. First of all, establish this collaborative relationship with the council, which is client, the architecture practice, and then researcher and UFSS and the studio staff. So we actually this project now produced a publication that will be in the Association of Architecture Educators. So we have documented our pedagogical thinking and the results of the outcome of the project. So if you are interested, that's the paper you can read. So in particular, in how we implement urban morphology research into this is in the cycle 2 after the Meanwhile project, we have translated the concept of urban morphology into 6 performance indicators for the students, because the urban morphology as a theory sometimes can be quite difficult for undergraduate students to grasp. So in order to make them really programmatic and applicable to their projects, we introduced these 6 performance indicators, asked them to look at land uses on the high street, environmental issues, connectivity and accessibility, heritage, street frontage, and public realm. So we believe this is the most relevant morphological elements, or once they analyze them, they could directly apply them to the design project. So some examples of the students' outcome, you can see that they have done some audits of the quality of public spaces on the high street, and some like street furniture and perceptive quality of the high street as well. And some did analysis on the block structure on the town center where the high street is located, and also the pedestrian flow and different access points in the high street. They also look at the front and back situation of the block structure, I should mention. Land uses at different levels. They also look into the historical land uses, land use pattern as well to see the changes, and also those accessible points in more detail. Look at barriers and whether the pathway is smooth and for disabled and for parents with children, etc. So we really made this as a collaborative and dissemination. So we did put a lot of effort on dissemination. So we did a final exhibition on the high street, and then we invite the local community to come here and comment on the students' work. You can see that we recorded what the community's concept or feedback on the project as well. And I should mention during the project, we also did a media-based survey with the community to ask them to provide ideas and aspirations to the high street. And we did a seminar in the high streets and talk about different concepts, and also invite community members and council members really to experience what the project would like using VR technology. Another project I want to mention is that at the master level, so this is led by the UFS research group. I'm just showing one project in particular to give you a flavor of what it's like. So this project is about the challenge that Venice, as a tourist-oriented city, currently is facing. They have the Venice, as you all know, attract a lot of visitors every year, and that's really marginalized the local community, and they don't necessarily use the public spaces anymore in Venice. So the group of students, they propose to use the morphological characteristics and quality in Venice and trying to reclaim public spaces in the cruise terminal. So compared to the usual Venice urban form, the cruise terminal has very low density. So they find this could be an opportunity to apply that quality into the cruise terminal and regenerate that area for the locals and tourists. So what they did is to have a really good thorough analysis on the Venice's urban morphology and understand the qualities of different types of spaces. So they cut through different transects through Venice, connecting the public spaces, the key public spaces in Venice, and they discovered several types of public spaces, as you can see here, from like little streets that are very commonly used by residents in Venice, courtyard spaces, semi-public, some bigger streets that people have a lot of daily activities happening there, and also slightly bigger, bigger, not to the plaza scale, but square. They do trading and they do marketing events and stuff like that, and also the very big plaza. So they have collected those characteristics of different typology of public spaces, and then what they really creatively did was to apply those strips, lay them onto the cruise terminal, which currently have very low density, and the urban form quality are very different from the traditional Venice morphology. This obviously the concept that they literally just lay the strips on this land, but after this they have like connected those spaces. But that's just a concept showing how they are creatively using morphological characteristics and typology into the design. Right, so that's my presentation. I hope is in time, and any question would be welcomed. Thank you. Stop sharing now.
So before we open for questions and open floor discussions, I would like to ask the speakers for some reflection, since it's part of the KAEBUP project to do reflexive practice. Specifically from the external speakers, some reflections on the KAEBUP's pedagogic approach, and more generally from all the speakers, reflection on the colleagues' different approaches and how they compare with KAEBUP. What did you see as the main similarities or differences, and perhaps the opportunities seen in the other approaches to inform your own? Is there anyone who wants to go first? Maybe I will start from the external speakers to get some feedback on KAEBUP. So I will start from Carl, as Faye has just stopped speaking.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, certainly the thing that struck me is that the ideas set out by Nadia and Vitor chime with the sorts of things that we've been doing, and certainly the learning outcomes based to the approach. That's certainly the basis across our university at Oxford Brook. But I think also that the different ways of approaching it. So combining the lectures with, so I think that the terms you used were the didactic, authentic, and reflective. And so certainly I would say that we kind of confirm or sort of feel the same way, that those are the effective ways of doing it, and certainly the feedback that we get from the students is very positive. So we and our external examiners in looking at what assessing how we're doing is a positive one. So I was certainly I guess relieved that we're kind of on the same sheet, the same hymn sheet, and trying to do similar things. And I guess what's interesting is then also how you're trying to extend that in the KAEBUP approach of using the different channels, as it were, to extend that. I think that to my mind, that partly the challenge is getting. I mean, you talk about the kind of the communities, and certainly the COVID and the lockdown tested our capacity to retain that sense of community, certainly within the students, but also trying to get that sense. And so it was a real relief to be able to get the practitioners coming back and to have that sense of a group. So I think that the positive side of working together, our students love it. They really have a positive experience out of that and learn a lot from each other. And I think that the other thing is beneficial from our point of view is having part-time students, often who are mid-career, and are able to provide a level of experience that's very beneficial. But we also have a mix of architecture students and direct entry urban design students, some of whom are from planning, and that's also beneficial. So those are say, I think that I'm really pleased to see what you're doing, and it's very helpful to kind of reinforce and add to what we're doing. But I guess there's a convergence in what is good practice to get the results. So that would be my thought.
Thank you. Faye, do you want to give some feedback to the KAEBUP approach specifically?
Yeah, sure. It's really very exciting to learn that KAEBUP have done so much. To be very honest, I didn't know this was happening, and I really feel that you've done an excellent job on really design those approaches to bring research into practice. Like Vita just explained, go beyond the traditional lecture seminar to like 1 week international workshop training and bring a lot of students together to co-produce knowledge. And also you did the business model workshop. I think that could be really useful to get the practitioner really involved and understanding of morphology, and hopefully they could apply this in their daily practice. And also the student internship, I think that could be that is really something quite inspirational. I would say actually we did achieve student internship at the end of the Heighten project I just showed. After, because this is the graduating year of their undergraduates, one student actually got internship in the council, in the local council, after they finished this, and another student got an internship in the architectural practice. We collaborated, so that was also quite a coincidence, but like really glad to see you are like purposely doing it. Ours may be a bit accidental because the council and the architecture practice saw the student potential and they offered this position. But I think like what you did was like really quite inspirational and excellent. And also the open resource, I would like to share that with my network if that I think this is great.
Please do. Thank you. Nadia, do you want to give us some reflections on how the KAEBUP approach compares to the others? But also maybe you want to say something a bit more about the business models workshop and how they fit in specifically with the field of architecture and urban design and planning in our case.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Laia. Thank you very much for the presentations, which were really, really interesting. And personally, I can find a very good sort of feedback for the KAEBUP project, but also some similarities. What I found very interesting, and I think it would be quite helpful for us as we develop the pedagogical model, we focused a lot on the pedagogical approach in relation to real life case studies and on the skills that a student needs to have at the end of the education. What I found interesting in both the presentations is also the focus on the theoretical, let's say, concepts on teaching urban morphology. For example, Faye mentioned how that was simplified for the bachelor program, which I found very interesting. So how do you, in a way, embed the different theories on urban morphology in the students' learning, and in which ways? Because I think for us, it was always a challenge through this research project. What is the appropriate content on teaching urban morphology? And in Carl's case, we saw the different theoretical approaches also in different contexts and internationally, and then how these relate to the students' design projects. So I think that that's an aspect that for us would be very, very useful and helpful to revisit, let's say, this pedagogical model that we propose with particular focus on the content of urban morphology teaching. What I find slightly different in terms of the relationship with real life case studies is the co-production of knowledge and the collaboration with actual professional practices, which is what we try to do at KAEBUP. We try to do that because we try to see how we could benefit from each other, let's say research, which is done in an academic environment, and projects proposed by professional practices. And I think that the aim was to create a strong dialogue between the two for our professional practices that participate in the project to, let's say, embrace them or acknowledge the value of research outcomes in informing design decisions, which is not something easy, especially in the Cypriot context, but also to inform our curriculum with up-to-date and current, let's say, requirements from the market or from professional practice, and skills that could, come back to informing the way we teach and the curriculum. This is, I think, the slight difference that I would sort of note. In terms of the business model workshops, it's exactly because we identified through a lot of literature review and research that we did through KAEBUP, which are skills which are not subject specific, but are also important in the training of architects and urban designers, which relate to entrepreneurship, to social entrepreneurship, and also acknowledging and identifying new spatial practices that may form in the market. We talked a lot with startups and practices which were not the traditional practices, in the sense that it's a professional architectural office and the brief is given by the client, but also exploring practices which were initiated by the architects. And this is more towards social entrepreneurship. And for this end, we collaborated with the Center for Entrepreneurship in the University of Cyprus. And we have also proposed a social entrepreneurship course, which will be included in the engineering school, and it will be specifically tailored to urban practices. And for the business models workshops, we collaborated with 2 professors from Tokyo and France, who are on the innovation side, on the social entrepreneurship, let's say, background discipline. And with them, we tried to see how do these practices evolve and how do they relate to urban practices. And it was really difficult to identify urban practices with business models and relating to this social entrepreneurship and so on. And this was something we tried for the first time through KAEBUP project, and it proved very interesting, and also very interesting for the students, because they could reflect on their projects, they could pitch their projects in front of people and relevant stakeholders. Just one more thing that I really liked about FACE presentation, which we haven't done much in the KAEBUP project, the feedback and the involvement of the local community in the projects, and the fact that the proposals were exhibited in public space, and there was a feedback from the actual users of the space, which I thought was very interesting as well. Vita?
Yeah, Vita, do you want to add?
Sure. Well, I think that it's not a surprise that we share a common ground. Of course, I think that this the 3 keywords that go through our I say myself and Nadia presentation today are, of course, teaching, research, and practice. And I think that they are also present for Carl and for Faye. Obviously, the other significant part of our common ground is urban morphology. This is something that brings us together, and urban morphology is an interdisciplinary field, and because of that, and that is, I think, one of its main strengths, and it's also one of its main weaknesses, because, for instance, in teaching, the teaching of urban morphology is in between, or it's spread throughout a course of architecture, of geography, or of urban design or planning, but very rarely it is something that has a strong coherence along that course. When I was looking at both at Faye and Carl presentation, of course that one important difference in this is that Faye is teaching in an architecture course and Carl is teaching in an urban design course, and that is it is very, very different. Of course, that another significant difference is that they are working, each one of them is working as a team of colleagues, and we are also working as this community of practice, but in fact, it's made of different teams. So the 2 processes, or the 3, the KAEBUP process and Carl and Faye processes are also different because of that, of the institutional framework that is involved. One of the things that is present in KAEBUP, and as it was in EPUM, is that we benefit a lot if we learn from each other. And I think that obviously, as Nadia has mentioned, in all the aspects that she mentioned, we can benefit a lot from learning from Carl and Faye, because they have presented us very rich experiences. I would love to go into detail, but I think that I should give you the word now, and probably would like to open the debate.
Thank you, Vitor. Yes, I will open to the audience. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to put your hand up or just switch on your camera and talk. While you think about it, we do have a comment in the chat, which says, co-productive practice with ANL, legacy, hard, e.g. a site, and soft empowerment and learning, ours and those we work with, an agency. So powerful. Does anyone have any questions?
Can I ask something, Ilaria?
Please do.
Anna.
Welcome.
Hi. Although I haven't participated a lot, and Achilles was more into the project than myself, I found this very, very interesting. As a planner, being educated in Britain, I also found both Faye's and Carl's presentations interesting, but Carl showed me something that I always thought there was a lack between the planners and the architect, the bridge that needed to bridge this gap. And I would like to ask Carl about the people who graduate from his course. Do they work as planners or architects? Are they members of the Royal Town Planning Institute? How is the practice and the theory blended in this aspect in the UK, at least, which I know?
Thank you. Yeah, it's still an issue in a number of respects, and so while we, in a sense, urban design provides the forum for bringing the architects and the planners together. In terms of the students, in some cases they are the planners who come to do they're mid-career, so they've come to do an urban design master's, and then we'll be working with the architects. Where there's a difference, and sometimes is a challenge to try to get them to kind of work positively together, and partly that's skill sets, because urban design is, in terms of what we're asking them to produce, is still very visual. Some of the planners still won't have the skills that the architects have, and in some cases, when we try and put them together in teams, and we actually very actively put the teams together. So we get them to do personality tests and check them in their strengths, and even from one term to the next, we'll readjust if they don't work out. So we really try to put them together. And sometimes when the planners are with the architects, they feel intimidated, or it's the other way around. It's like, well, the planners aren't helping out because they're not doing any work. So it's still a challenge, and one of the things that we do to try to resolve that is have there is the working together, and so that to a certain extent. Certainly, when it comes to the more mature students, they are providing input to the architects who wouldn't necessarily get that experience elsewhere. So I wish I'd say we've have it all resolved. It's not the case, and that it's one that we also working with, because we have some students who are from doing a spatial planning MA take urban design as a specialization, and so we have to try and work them in a way that they don't they feel they're part of the team, and we just experiment with different ways. But I think that the project work is a real benefit in terms of giving a common focus.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a challenge maybe that Nadia should also look into, about the curriculum in Cyprus, because I do feel this is a big gap, and I would feel intimidated in your course because I'm a planner, with socioeconomic background in engineering, but I feel that, I am not a full urban designer in that sense, and that's what's lacking, and that's what we should aim for this urban morphology. As someone said, it's an interdisciplinary field which we have to look into. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just as a note, I think that the structuring that we use, which is based on morphology, is a great help in that respect. In that we get different perspectives. So if we want to try to make the most of those different people in it, is to get them to give their different perspectives on those the different aspects and the levels. And so that can help as a way to bring it together, but it's still a challenge.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laria.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Carl. Nadia, do you want to respond to that, or maybe I can say? Shall I?
Yeah, go ahead.
In just some feedback from my personal experience in the KAEBUP project. I had the feeling throughout the activities of KAEBUP that we didn't actually get that much of attention between the architects and the planners or people from other backgrounds. Specifically in the business models workshops, which were aimed at different backgrounds, but also all the sectors, let's say, involved in the project. The participants worked together. So we had students, researchers, academics, practitioners from different backgrounds working in mixed groups. Now that maybe because it's a special environment, let's say, within the framework of a research project, it doesn't come with the pressures of working towards a degree or grades and so on. So people can sort of, feel free to work together in different ways and match their skills and feel like they can contribute something, even if they're not actually doing exactly the same as the person next to them. So perhaps there is something to learn from that when what they're asked to do is somewhat different from the traditional assignments, then they might rely on each other and on each other's different skills to produce something. So, I don't know, did you want to add something, Nadia?
Michelle, I think, wants to add something.
Yeah, there is a comment in the chat that says that urban morphology is and can be the bridge, I assume, between architects and planners.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a bridge that and the potential of what we do as urban morphologists, I think that has got the potential not only to bridge between our different professions, but between our different clients. And I think that is one of the things that is so powerful to give to our students, and for us to perhaps re-understand how powerful it is what we're doing. The lines that you draw in a framework becomes something that gets implemented. It can either integrate a community or it can bypass a community. It is immensely powerful. And then the type of framework that you might develop in in an urban environment that has got all of its services, like the ones you just showed, or it might be a framework for an environment where there are none of those services, like an informal settlement. And we have to understand that a framework is really just a plan in trying to help us to understand which of the tools that we're going to use. I made some other points that I quickly just want to hope to inspire you with, because I think this is one of the most powerful things that I've seen not only students but clients change how they feel about a project is if that they actually experience that place and that community. And in that is the power of co-production, is that it doesn't matter whether it's a student or me as a practitioner that has got some small contribution to a place or to a project. That project needs a legacy. It needs people within that community that will carry that vision beyond what is in my plan or in my budget or in my time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Does anyone want to respond to that, or are there any other questions for the speakers or comments?
Maybe I could respond and also echo what Michelle just said. Well, I also believe that morphology is a really good way to bridging people with different backgrounds, like what I'm currently doing with Heighten. In addition to the student projects, it is also it's a research project funded by Research England, and we are looking at like using morphology. The video I showed you actually is not from the student project, but the current research project we did there is to use morphology to capture the community's place value. So how they really value a public space, the streets and a building. And we're trying to capture that in the morphological model and to show that this is not only a physical space, but also it carries people's history, memory, like the past event happening in their life and how they really value that place. I think that's really important to take into consideration in any planning in the future. So really strongly echo what Michelle just said.
Ilaria, can I'll just add, again, reinforce what Michelle and Faye are saying. Just one of the things we get the students to do is write a reflective statement at the end of the work. So they'll hand in their workbook and they'll have a reflective statement. And I'll just read one of the more encouraging bits that we've got, which was a slide that I didn't show, which is, so this is from a student reflecting on the experience of doing the module, is the structuring of urban tissue has a great influence on the socioeconomic aspect of the city, which affects human behavior and responses. This study should be the key platform for urban designers to grasp a better picture of the principle of delivering a well-designed place. So the students see, because it's kind of morphology is just integrated into the way we teach urban design, and I'm really encouraged to see how they have been integrating it into just the way they think, and they see that, but I think Nadia and Vitor, what KAEBUP and Ilaria, what KAEBUP is doing is fantastic in extending that and looking at different ways of getting that to work. So it's a sense if we can build on where it has been successful and then say test it out in these more innovative ways, I think it's really encouraging.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience or comments? I can see a hand up. Akalia.
Hello, everybody. I'm an urban planner, and I'm specialized in urban design and urban conservation. And I'm working in the faculty department of architecture. So my one of my basic challenges in the department is providing the students with the ability of analyzing the whole part relationship. So because without understanding the whole, actually, I don't believe that they can understand the part. But yeah, there are many challenges because I think architectural way of thinking is really very different from the perception of, let's say, urban planning. So I'm just actually curious how do you give any exercises on analyzing the whole part relationship, especially in architectural education? So because in my point of view, without understanding the whole and establishing a relationship with the whole, how can the architectural student can understand the parts? Thank you.
Very, very interesting question. Who wants to take it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that that's essential. To understand what role a building has as part of something bigger is essential. And one of the encouraging things that we've experienced is because having had architects on the course, they do the urban design specialism in their for the MA in their first year, I think, and then so they go on to do another year. And we've had them come back to us and say, look at what we've done, but also the tutors on the architecture course are coming back to us and saying what that you're providing them is turning out really well. Is so that the understand essentially fundamental to the morphological framework is that notion of part to whole. So I think I think it's clearly an issue. It's still an issue that's the architects who decide to do the urban design specialization are already minded to think in that way. So the real challenge is to get the architects who aren't minded to think in that way. But we do have architectural practices come to look for the students that have done the urban design course, and a lot of the students do want to do that. So it's certainly encouraging in that. So I hope that's not too simplistic an answer to say, well, it's just urban morphology. That's all you have to do. I think the way I think it works is because we show the relevance of it and get them to work it out in design terms, that they have to work out the different elements in the design context. So I think that for the architect's perspective, that the design task is the thing that helps them to understand that. But we fundamentally say you have to look at the way this works as part of something bigger. So I guess as I say, other than getting them all to work together and to see that that those provide a better result in the end. So I think certainly the having to go out and do the analysis and look at what's actually out there, I think is a big help. And so we've found very positive results from the architects as well as the planners, and saying how beneficial it is to see to do the analysis and to take it out in a sense from not just the design exercise, but understanding how other people have designed. So learning from the existing environment and say, well, how does that work? Why does it work the way it does? And that has to include the context in which it's working. So as I say, I hope that's provided you some help. It's along with the challenge of getting planners and architects to talk together. I think getting the architects to see beyond their site boundary is always a challenge.
Thank you.
respond as well? I know there are comments in the chat. We read them in a moment. Vitor?
Hello, Salvia. Great to see you. I think that your question goes back to Michelle and to Anne's question. We did not address the gap that exists between architects and planners in KAEBUP, and obviously it's an important gap that has that is different from country to country. For instance, in the UK, where Carl and Faye are based, they seem to be much farther apart than, for instance, in Portugal, where planning is done by architects. But in fact, if you look closer, the architects who devote themselves to planning in Portugal, somewhere along the line, I don't know why and when, they tend to get different frameworks, different objects, and that is related to your question of the whole and the part. They have different purposes, processes, they have different results. So in the end, it seems that they are playing something different than architects are. And as Michelle, I think that urban morphology is a powerful tool to relate both worlds. Urban morphology is not descriptive or normative. It just helps you to understand the physical form of human settlements and not the ephemeral characteristics of form. These are not very important for us, but those characteristics that have an impact on people's life. For instance, what Carl was referring when citing his students. So I think that by this understanding of the most important characteristics of physical form that urban morphology can give both to planners and to architects, and by talking with the same language to both, which I think is something that many have lost. Many planners and architects, they do not speak the same language, because we can offer a common language when addressing different objects and different scales. I think we can mediate this relation, which, as you said, is not always easy, to be nice, between planners and architects.
Thank you. Thank you, Vitor.
Thank you. And I think you addressed Michelle's comment, who was also raising that urban morphology should be at the core to for the understanding of the whole part relationship, as well as systems thinking, which is a little bit more theoretical. I don't know if Michelle wants to come in. Any other questions or comments?
I really kind of picking up from that. I'm desperately writing notes because I want something that we need to just kind of sort out ourselves. And a thought that just came to mind is, do we get the architects and in their teams to debate things and to kind of present their own particular ways of doing it, but also these the tendency when we talk about morphology to talk about the form, the physical form, so part to whole. But given what the student said, well, the whole socio-economic context and the way people use spaces, and so I think the debate, the planners are potentially going to have a different perspective on how people use space, and the way that it's built. So what is the process? And it's something I'm trying to promote more, is saying, well, if we're discontent with the things that get built, well, don't just look at the form, look at the process, and try and say, well, how is it delivered? So it's the old thing. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect the same result, well, you're not thinking, innovatively, or laterally enough to come up with a different way of doing it. So, to say, I'm just thinking about trying to resolve learning issues in it, but I think it's great to have a forum here to help stimulate the ideas.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from the panel or the speakers?
Michelle looks like she's got her hand up.
Sorry. Michelle, go ahead.
I think this is really an opportunity. What Carl has said is that and this is where systems thinking comes in, is that realizing the systems are fundamentally broken, whether it's our planning systems or our water systems. And it requires of each of us not to play a power game, but it opens not only our relationship to our colleagues, but our relationship to the wider issue requires more. It requires a different way of working. It doesn't really matter. And I do acknowledge that there is a fundamental process within every context that is different. But I get shown so often that the power of the work that we do is carried on by a community. There is no master plan or guide that is good enough if it's not embedded within a community. It's not up to me or to the level of my skill. It is such a powerful thing. It is such a powerful thing, and it makes us all small. It doesn't matter, the role we play. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I also say a few words as the
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to say that although we are talking about urban morphology here and always talking about urban morphology and consider ourselves as morphologists, but morphology is never just a physical form. I think that's really how this form come about is through years and years of spatial practice by the communities, and there's a political intention in it and economic viability in it, and all these factors influence what the urban form look like. And without understanding the process, how they shaped and what they represent and how they carry aspirations, memories, I think it's just meaningless to reproduce any types. So I think is always the thought that morphology is a representation of the society, and that's the base understanding, I think, to pass that to practitioners and to students.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? Last chance for questions. I think, there is beautifully said, Faye, in the comments. So I think if there are any other pressing issues, we can continue the conversation in another event, in person or online. We'll see each other, many of us, in conferences in the summer and so on. So despite being a few minutes early, I will bring it to a close. Thank you very much to the presenter, Vito, Nadia, Faye, and Carl, and to the audience for joining us today. As I said, you will soon find the recording online on our YouTube channel, and I hope to see you again soon at another event. Thank you very much.